hangs from the ceiling. It's okay to eat fish, 'cause they don't have any feelings. Something in the way, something in the way, yeah.
Hello, and good day, and welcome to the Naughty Dog live stream. Today we're continuing our playthrough of The Last of Us, or Last of Us Remastered on PS4. If you didn't catch us last week or the week earlier where we were doing Left Behind or the beginning of the game, you can catch the videos, sort of our VOD, on our Twitch page or on YouTube as well. It'd be really great. On our first installment, we had Neil and Kurt go through the prologue and parts of Quarantine Zone, which we will pick up shortly. This sort of mini-series that we're embarking on is our own playthrough of The Last of Us, where we're bringing in special guests from the studio for each episode to play through and talk about what we're playing through. If you really like the playthroughs that we're doing, please make sure to follow, subscribe, and turn on notifications on Twitch and YouTube. But again, since we're playing Last of Us Remastered, and sort of what we've been saying for a while is that we're not going to be doing questions on The Last of Us Part 2. But speaking of Q&A, one of the things is we do want to try to answer your questions. If you're following us on the stream, please check out the Q&A panel that's down below. Put in your questions there. If you are on mobile, there's a blue and green circle at the top of the chat that you can click to submit questions. Take a look at the questions there. If there's something that's already been asked, please upvote. We'll get those. We'll try to get through a bunch of questions as we can through the stream. Speaking of answering questions, this brings us to our guests. We've got a couple folks here from the studio today that I'm really excited to have. Andrew Frost and Matthew Gallant. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're working on? And Matthew actually has worked on Last of Us, while Andrew is only on Last of Us Part 2. But let us know a little bit about what you've worked on or what you work on.
Go ahead and go first.
Sure.
Hi, I'm Matthew Gallant. The Last of Us Part 1 was the first game I worked on at Naughty Dog. And I'm a systems designer, and most of what I did on The Last of Us Part 1 was infected combat. So I think that'll end up being quite germane to the level we're doing today.
I'm Andrew. I've been at Naughty Dog for about 2 years now, almost exactly actually. And I've been working on the infected combat and AI scripting for The Last of Us Part 2. So I played through The Last of Us Part 1 as a fan and decided I wanted to try and come work on it and managed to get that opportunity. So fun to be a part of the stream.
That's awesome. And you said you haven't played this recently.
No, not in a while.
All right, this will be good because Andrew's taking control of the controller for what we're playing. Why don't we get started? So what we're doing is we didn't get to exactly where we wanted to last week. So we're going to continue from where we left off just to make sure that we've caught up to the introduction of Ellie. We've just met, why don't we get started, yeah.
Sure.
And we've just met Marlene, who was played by Emerald Dandridge. She also plays Evelyn in Uncharted 4, so the older woman who was the sort of partner and colleague of Cassandra Morgan, Nathan Drake, and Sam's mother. Great actor. Neil had mentioned, wish we could work with her again. So, Merle, give us a call. We'll find something for you at some point. While we're waiting to load, I actually saw that there was one question that we've come through that I couldn't answer. Someone was asking if there are going to be any more Last of Us comic books. There's no plans right now. We've been really busy on working on the game. It's taken us away from working on putting a comic book together. That type of stuff is actually a lot more work than you would imagine. So it's something that we've put off. It's something that I'm going to try to have a conversation about once we ship this game, but there's no guarantees on whether we're doing it. I love comic books, so I'd love to see some more, but it really depends on if there's a really good story for us to talk about. So now that we're back into playing the game, and we're still in Boston, again, we've just met Merle, who is, as Tess said, or I'm sorry, I think it was Joel who said Queen Firefly. So the leader of the Fireflies in Boston, on the way to try to get...
Come on, Tess.
Talk about some NPC AI scripting here.
I can tell you for a fact that tiny platforms like that leading into ladders are very difficult.
What are the type? I guess when you're thinking about that, what are the types of considerations? Like, how can you account for those cases when you're sort of scripting buddy AI?
We usually have to be very, very thoughtful about where the buddy needs to be relative to the player. We actually have two distinct skills on the AI side. It's either going to be lead or follow. And usually it's very clear from the context, it needs to be one or the other. So it looked like there, Tess and they were leading the player.
Sure.
And so in that case, it's really important to keep them in front, and therefore they're going to be taking the ladder first. It seemed like what happened there was just the player, as the player can interfere with these sequences, get in the way, and we don't want the NPC to just clip through the player, so we end up having to do little dodges, do little readjustments, and we have a really great kind of just locomotion system that can try its best to handle all these, cases where anything could happen. The player's in control, and the AI have to kind of deal with whatever's happening. But usually, you can see here, the player can't interfere too badly because the buddy is leading, and
right.
And
that's why we get to do this little stealth encounter. I remember trying to do this one pure stealth quite a few times when I first played, and just never being able to get it. And then finally, I got most of them, but then the last 4 would always catch me. And I was doing restart checkpoint if I got caught. I didn't keep playing that way for very long.
I'm going to get to one of the lines in this part that I really like a little bit, but I did want to mention that we've been joined by our final guest, Kion Phillips, who's all the way off on one side of the screen. Kion, why don't you let us know what you work on real quick? Do a quick intro.
Well, right now, mixture of the IDC gameplay, animation, and occasionally cinematics. So.
Cool. Well, we'll have some of those coming up, so
Oh, yeah.
we'll talk a little bit about that. What I wanted to go back to is I really like a little bit of the hints that you keep getting to learn about who Joel is, where Eileen's like, we can sneak by them even though it's not your style. And instantly you're like, okay, this guy's a bruiser, he's more capable, even though one of the ways to approach this is stealth, and I think it's great to be able to take out a few guys, and obviously they're teaching you to go, okay, you want to stealth these 2 guys to begin with, even though you don't have to. It is interesting to get that mindset of like, oh, well, Joel is really a capable character, or at least people think that he's very capable in this world.
I also love how you kind of saw it, just before this stream started, where he with Robert.
Yeah.
Where Joel is kind of coming out at the start of the game. He's a henchman. He's Tess's henchman.
Yeah.
He's the muscle to some extent, and just how that informs how all these little hints of how the characters talk to him or interact to him or have expectations of him.
Sure. So one of the sequences earlier when we were talking about stealth, which is really nice, is a lot of how we're incorporating. I think this was the first game where we're really incorporating how active your buddy is in terms of combat and helping you out in situations, both with Vox or stuff like that. When you're looking at these situations, there's an earlier one where Tess was taking down a couple of Robert's guys as well with you. What are the types of things that you're thinking about in terms of, or what are the considerations, I guess, there when you're scripting that? Like how do you make that happen?
Buddies can be really, really tricky to design, kind of from both the AI and kind of the design, because
you don't want to do the optional dialogue.
Was there one? I didn't see it.
Oh,
no.
brutal.
Is there one? There's one
Calling
here?
you out. Yeah, there's one over to the left on the bridge.
Oh, okay.
It's a really nice touch. It's the only reason I'm bringing it up.
All right. Yeah, let me know if I'm walking past it like that.
But buddies can be really tricky in combat because you don't want to design them just like, oh, they're player 2, and they have all the same, capabilities as the player. That seems like it would be fun, but you don't want to create a game that's fun for the AI that's not playing. You want to make it. You always want to keep the player's experience very central. So we really have to be very, very subtle and make the buddy always feel like they're helping you and assisting in the combat and participating, while simultaneously not stealing all the kills.
Right.
Not, you've got a shot lined up on someone and they just, shoot them from the side and now they're doing a hit reaction sideways and you miss your shot. So it really is a very, very subtle thing to kind of create that effect.
Okay. Yeah, we'll talk about it more because there's going to be a lot, again, where you've got 2 buddies in Billstown, things get really complicated and hectic, and so it's really interesting to talk about some of the, I feel like we'll get to it, some of the things that you have to keep in mind on how to do it, and sort of like what are the challenges and difficulties that you encounter that. So one of the things I was just calling out with the optional dialogue is you get this moment of like, oh, well, like the Fireflies have just been executed, like right there. Like the soldiers are not joking around.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think I must have, by starting to go down the stairs, let Marlene, I hit a trigger or something that Marlene would run and wait near the exit and then miss the opportunity, unfortunately.
Cool. Got some other questions we could get?
Sure. Although we're coming up on...
Yes, the...
Joel, give me a hand with this.
The convenient ways that we get you into the perfect position for the cinematics.
Fuck away from me! Let her go.
I think what I've really liked, especially going through now and thinking about the playthroughs for the game and looking at this, is how much,
Don't worry, this is fixable.
how deliberately we're setting up, explaining who the characters are, but subtly through their actions, to see how protective Ellie is of Marlene here. Like immediately, it's not like, oh, I don't know who these people are, and like, is something wrong? It's like, I want to protect Marlene. Like,
We're smuggling her.
and that there's a history between them that you don't know, but you already get that there's what type of relationship that they have. And this comes up a lot later. When we go through Billstown, there's gonna be so much box while you're playing through gameplay as well. But really like how it's established here.
I actually hadn't noticed playing it previously, but like the very first shot of Ellie is her with the switchblade as well.
Oh,
And
yeah.
It's so iconic for her. It's like right away, it's kind of get that part of her character, I guess you could say, to some extent. But yeah.
I think that moment helped set up as well, just like when you're first playing it, you don't know who this girl is, but just the fact that she is reacting so defensively when every other person who looks like a civilian in the game has been pretty
Before or after he left your
like
militia group?
calm for the most part, except for when explosions are going off. And then having someone just walking through a door trying to stab you, it's like, what is going on with this little girl that is trying to murder me as I walk through a door? And it starts to set up that mystery of like, what's special about her.
Yeah, and I also like too, it's like, clearly there is history again between Joel and Marlene. They know each other. They have Tommy in common, although she says Tommy in the past tense, which is an interesting little detail in this part. But she's using that to establish that Ellie can trust Joel, but in the meantime, Joel and Tess are openly talking about Ellie as an object in front of her. So I think why don't we skip over to Billstown, which we're heading now. We've done the introduction to Ellie. I think that'd be a really great place. I'd really like to head into some infected combat. Can you, Kion, you worked on some stuff in Bills. Can you tell us like what you worked on there?
Well, this right here is particularly the cinematic when we first run into Bill. It's the that you see with the when Bill comes in and chops off the.
Yeah.
So that was pretty cool. And then once they get down underneath the, I think it's underneath the church, or then they're talking about, Bill saying like how Ellie's gonna get Joel killed, get both of them killed.
Sure.
And I worked in that cinematic.
Oh, cool.
Too. So yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's cool.
I think there's probably, are we going to see the cutscene, I guess, coming into Billstown?
I'm not sure.
No, we're going to probably start off right in the woods.
Nice.
for me, it's like, it's funny having played The Last of Us Part 1 and been so wowed by it. And sometimes I forget, like, you know, Kion, we've worked together on plenty of stuff.
Yeah,
but, like, part of my brain still goes like, oh, you worked on that awesome game that I love. Like, that's so cool.
Yeah.
I always feel like you can, to some extent, like get a gauge of how veteran someone is by like what examples come to mind to them.
Oh, really?
Like sometimes Travis McIntosh is like, oh, on Jack we did this, and I'm like, oh wow.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Not many people from those days left now here, just as time goes by.
I just want to put a big shout out that we've got a pretty special guest on the stream chat watching and in chat, Anthony Caliber, who
Nice.
our speedrunner. What's
Oh,
up,
awesome.
Anthony? Really nice to see you joining us for this. So this is the first time that we're encountering clickers, and we're sort of setting up this to sort of teach you a little bit about what their mechanics are. What is it, I guess, given that this is when you're meeting clickers for the first time, what is it that you're trying to immediately train the player, and how does this setup sort of encourage that?
Well, so this we skipped past Tilted Building,
Yeah.
which would have been
the first time.
the clicker intro.
Yeah.
But I think this section is really intended to be very low key, and that's why a lot of these clickers, they're sleeping, they're right off the bat, they're kind of encouraging you to move slowly, and that's going to carry over through this whole kind of street section. Is this idea that, you know, move slowly, move cautiously, look at all the things, and it's actually going to be very low threat. But then, because you're moving slowly, because you're taking your time, now you're catching all these story beats,
Sure.
all these cool things in the environment to find.
I think this is the first time you get an upgraded melee weapon.
Yeah,
It is.
So it's an opportunity to learn that you can kill a clicker in one hit if you do that.
Yeah, it's just earlier, you on top of the roofs, you pick up that pipe with the scissors on it.
Joel's like,
That
oh, this
tell
is
you that you can upgrade. Yeah, Joel has a
a
reaction
good
to it.
idea.
Well,
Yep.
I love all the stuff. Some of that stuff that's a little bit more like sort of gnarly, hacked stuff. So much of it is like Bill's the one who figured this out. Bill's the one who first taped a pipe,
I
taped scissors
love-
to a pipe.
Sorry to interrupt. I love that little story beat that just happened there of Ellie not knowing how to whistle,
Oh yeah.
because that's something, you know, we carry through for the rest of the game in different sections.
Those little story beats, like when we start working on it, at least on the cinematics, and maybe sometimes in like doing the in-game cinematics, in the game IGCs, the Vox part I miss out on. So then when I actually get a chance to play, when I play the game through, I'm like, oh wow, I didn't know all this is in here. Like it's so much backstory that happens when you just walk around.
And usually all these story stuff goes in so late. Like we call it Vox.
Yeah.
That's just VO, you know, the actual voice and actual conversations. But like when you're playing this game and you're playing this level for years, you're walking around these buildings and you're like,
Exactly.
oh, it's kind of cool. I guess it's kind of interesting. And then you play it closer to release and you're like, there's all this story stuff, all these conversations. You finally get like, oh, that's why this section
Exactly.
was kind of slow and a little bit empty. It's because like, oh, it's supposed to fill in with all the getting to know you kind of conversations.
Even the small notes that build, like there was a note of Bill's there talking about getting a shipment of pills, and just the little notes that he like leaves for himself as reminders. You start to get a sense for of that character before you even meet him, which is kind of cool.
I think originally, like this whole area was like supposed to be like this filled up with Bill's traps, where you just that was the gameplay was trying to take
Navigate
apart
through
his-
the traps, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It was just too much. You know, you had infected on top of that, so it was alright. Just simplify.
Really,
it,
Andrew?
you know? Yeah.
And the level designer who made this was Junki Saito.
Yeah.
And he did kind of the macro structure of Billstown. He did the street and the church and the high school as kind of the three big landmarks in this level. And then Mark Davies took this level on later in development and got to the
They were super cute.
you know all the taking it to ship, getting the details
right.
in, getting the. I actually spoke to him before the stream because I wanted to say, oh, well, do you have any fun anecdotes or anything? And he had said that actually the traps was something he added.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
And
I just love this section as a player, like all these little buildings that you can go in and see different vignettes and all the notices and stuff. It just feels so detailed.
This pizza parlor in particular with the
Oh, yeah.
turning, which will make an appearance in Left Behind.
Yeah,
First appearance of it.
the little setup there.
Would you play this before?
No. But
It makes me wish that we had
Apparently, there's
like,
this character
actually being able to see what the game was, you know.
What was it?
It's kind of funny
She'd
that,
punch a hole through your stomach.
I guess,
in your
in
head.
principle, if they had a generator and a working one, they could get it to work.
Crank generator. Just
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's assuming that was not one of the finicky arcade games that would go down all the
Oh, yeah.
time. The boards weren't always built that well, so.
yeah. I don't know how many of them hold up for 25 years.
And I actually don't know, like, to what extent, Neil was planning or had this idea, because we hear in the VO there the idea,
Yeah.
oh, Ellie had a friend who, taught her about these video games, and then when you play Left Behind, you get to play that moment. But that's not something I'm super aware of, just how much of that was post-factual, like, oh, remember that beat in Billstown? Let's build on that, or whether he already had something in mind.
Well, I obviously I don't know for sure, but what I do know is that Neil was working with Faith on the comic book at the same
Yeah.
time, so there's the introduction of Riley. So I'm sure in his head he was already making some connections of how do I bring what's happened in the comic
Yeah.
book, what's Ellie's history anyway. Oh, we're going to explore some of it in the comic book. I'm going to bring this here. And I think then that's something that may have actually worked really well with Left Behind. What I've really liked about Bills, apart from the scavenging and sort of like learning all these notes, is the lighting in this is so good.
Yeah.
It always impresses me.
The first time I ever used photo mode was in this level, looking out towards the church.
I forget, is this supposed to be morning or afternoon?
I think afternoon.
Yeah,
'Cause
it's
it-
supposed to be afternoon,
yeah.
yeah.
the record
Because it gets
shop.
darker later on.
Look at this place.
I think this is the first time that they talk about music.
Well, it's really, Billstown is the first time Ellie and Joel spend a lot of time together, because we kind of glossed over it, but in between the sections we played, Tess died,
Yeah.
and now it's, she was kind of,
Kinda sad.
I think,
What is?
was the main one talking to Ellie beforehand, and kind of,
No one's around to listen to
when
it.
it was the three of you, really, Joel and Ellie were kind of ignoring each other and kind of antagonists to each other.
Right.
So now we have this section here where it's just the two of them, you've got this nice long downbeat, and yeah, I think you get this opportunity to two characters get to know each other and kind of start to build a little bit of a non-antagonistic relationship.
Super apt sign.
Well, you get a little hint of the fact that their relationships, where their relationship is, and maybe that they're curious about each other right after Cargo, where like Joel's asking about Ellie. She's obviously being cagey about her immunity, which is something also that we find out before Tess dies.
This section, by the way, was a nightmare to script.
Yeah.
For a long time, Ellie would be running around setting off that trap
Oh.
beforehand. So I think we had to invent all sorts of new nav blocker tech to support this section, because we need the clicker to run through the trap, but we don't want Ellie to run through it. Normally, we have these objects we can put down nav blockers that would just say, hey, no one can walk through this, act like there's an obstacle there. But this had to be like a faction-specific or like character-specific nav blocker. So I think we had to make all sorts of like tech just to support that, that one little section.
That's interesting.
I love your dedication to make sure that we could get that to happen,
Yeah.
rather than maybe we don't do that to happen.
There's actually
It's
a
the easier
couple.
one.
There's a couple of places it can happen on the street.
Oh,
Depends
really?
which alley you go down.
Does the other trap still exist?
That's a good question. Let's see.
yeah.
So if you had come down that alley first, the clicker would have done it there.
I always wish that I could scavenge them somehow.
Stay underneath it, okay? Just keep your head down. You'll be fine.
Those traps are, Bill is too good at setting traps to,
Yep.
to be able to scavenge them.
Yeah.
Well, there is the one that you just pick up randomly on the street. So
Yeah.
if they're not all strung up.
Yeah, it's I was wondering what would happen if I started shooting that clicker before it hit the trap.
I think it would have supported it, but probably we had to like make sure you couldn't kill it before it hit the trap.
Ah.
Or maybe we were great and we let you do it and just ruin the moment. But
And then you could get stuck
Yeah.
on the other side. Have
that's
to
always
figure
the
out-
kind of edge cases you have to figure out.
Yeah. Use the bow. I wonder if anyone misses this.
I couldn't believe when I went back to play this, like how easy in theory it would be to miss the bow.
Yeah, it's sort of hidden.
Yeah.
The playthrough, so I've played through this a couple times going through the first playthrough. I missed the bow. And then I got to the clicker and I was like, oh yeah, there's the bow. I need to pick up the bow. At least I knew it was there. It was like, oh, I need to turn around and go back and get it.
Yeah, I'm surprised that we let the player see, like, they're even allowed for the possibility of missing it.
I wonder,
Definitely cooler when we do.
do you know if there's any fallback, like secondary locations?
I don't remember. Yeah, hopefully. It would be a bummer to go through the rest of the game without the
The-
bow.
Clear, come on up.
All right.
There is another bow you pick up, but I think it's in Bill's armory in his safe house. So
Oh,
you'd
okay.
have to do everything up until that point without a bow.
Which
Because there
isn't
is
too
one
bad.
laying there with arrows as well.
Right. That's not too far.
Because I guess in the story that is, in theory, Bill's bow that you found.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
I love how perfectly
Yep.
the planks always just reach across.
The power of good metrics.
Oh. You can tell that I'm not familiar. I'm used to slightly different methodology of using this here.
Well, I just threw a Molotov when I
Yeah.
got to this, and just that was my easy way out for this.
That's actually something that might interest people. Like, talking about those plank gaps is like that's the kind of thing that like early in development level designers are figuring out. Like what are our standards for like how long is a plank, and therefore how long does the gap have to be where you can't jump it, but you do need a plank to cross it. And then the advantage of that is now we can have one plank length for the whole game instead of having every level needing its own plank.
That's why the planks are like 15 feet long.
Yeah, they are kind of hilariously long.
You have to figure out how to animate a 15-minute long thing.
Oh yeah.
Cool, looks great.
Well, but I really like a lot of the subtlety, especially with the plank and the ladders, where it's like,
Gotta be clear on
because
this.
you do have freedom in where you're placing them, but you also want to communicate to the player, oh, this is where you're going to place it either on the ground or on the wall, and how Joel's animation changes subtly to go, okay, this is where we can start placing it, and you're guiding the player to those solutions to these that way.
Right. Here, make sure you see the camera turns to make sure
Yep.
you see the trap before you fall. Because this one I can just crouch under still.
Definitely blew
And
us.
again, trying to get Ellie to crouch under this thing, like she has to animate, and we have to make sure her head is ducked in her animation, like by the time she
Yeah,
hits the
exactly.
wire.
Yeah.
But that means like because she has all these transitions, we have to say like, okay, a good meter from the wire, you need to start ducking. It's not like you can say, oh, start ducking as soon as you get to the wire. It's like,
Exactly,
oh,
yeah.
it's-
You're gonna go in there.
I wanna see
I love this little optional vignette.
yeah, this is one of my favorites too. It's always what I think of when I think of this level.
Don't worry.
It's kind
Well, I
of
like how the door's
spooky.
rattling, and then
Yeah.
it's like, you're really, for me, I'm really expecting a jump scare, and it's like, oh, there's nothing. That's coming later,
Yeah.
but it's not when you open the door.
And then the whole time
right.
you're through here, you're just tense. I feel like every time I've seen someone play it, they always go straight forward into here. They're expecting like, oh, is it gonna jump out of the closet? You're just like, where the heck did that infected go? Totally not at ease. Starting to see some of these examples of people having to pack up in the last moments as they're hearing about having to get to quarantine. And then right as you start to think, maybe it isn't in here, it pops out.
Thanks to chat, they mentioned that there's 3 places you can pick up the bow.
Oh,
There's another
thank
one
you.
that I must have missed on the playthrough. So
I guess you'd have to ignore the bow in Bill's basement.
Sure.
If I get the third opportunity.
These ones are always so sad. There's just so many of these little notes of people trying to find each other or make things work in the first days after the outbreak.
You think
I
they
just
ever
love the
found each
detail
other?
that all adds.
How the hell would I know?
And again, because that stuff goes in so late,
Yeah.
when you're playing this game level in development, you're like, oh, okay, cool, it's an apartment, and you get going. And then once the art goes in, now it's got all this context, and then the notes go in, and now that has additional context. Then the Vox goes in. Now there's, it's amazing how just so many layers to making a level like this work, because you really need just everything coming together. And
what's really great about those, and especially the things with the Vox, is that everything's built, like they're not built to,
Things are kind of awesome.
they're built to explain the world and what's happened to you as a player, but they're not built to be heavy-handed. And so you're getting this like, oh, I'm catching a moment in time, or someone is referencing something that I don't have complete knowledge about, but it starts to fill in this broader pictures you're going through, and that's part of, again, sort of what it's great about the Vox
before you
routine.
open that
Go for
door.
it.
Sorry, just to talk a little like nuts and bolts. You can notice like there's a lot of revolver ammo here, and it's about because we're about to give you infinite revolver ammo for a scripted sequence.
Oh.
like I kind of gloss over that a little bit. We're saying like, oh, let's make sure the player's really, really well stocked with revolver ammo so they don't notice.
That's funny.
And I talked a little bit to Lee Davis, who's the animator on this. And this intro here is one of the fairly few hand-keyed animations in The Last of Us. Like mostly, it's mocap, it's actors, but that sequence of getting like pulled upside down from standing was too difficult to mocap, so that he hand-key animated that.
That's incredible.
How smoothly this. Do you know who scripted this?
This was Nick Lantz, who's the scripter on this section. And he said it's a lot of, camera additives and player additives. It's kind of where you really, really get into the fairly, complicated scripting of making this really, really feel good. And he was saying he worked really, he iterated on a lot with this, with the director Bruce Straley, kind of just like feeling, how do you make it feel like you're upside down?
Yeah, it feels.
And to mention, that struggle was mocap. So they did hang someone upside down for that section,
wow.
apparently. But yeah, not the intro. And Lee said it was tough to make this feel believable because like Joel is hanging on a wire, he's really got nothing to, he's not got no footing to hold. So like trying to like still make it feel like there's this, good weighty struggle and it felt satisfying was a real challenge. But we've got incredible animators, so you guys figure it out.
Yeah, it just feels totally seamless with all your normal controls, but it's obviously all. Oh,
That helps justify the infinite
section.
I had a question about that when we were working on it. I was like, yeah, infinite ammo, what? Yeah.
Well, Nick was telling me, because I was actually asking him if he had any fun stories about this section, and he was saying that they tried for a long time to not give the player infinite ammo, but
Just didn't work.
with scripting, like you're often dealing with like, even if 90% of the time it works fine, if that 10%, 5%, whatever edge case is bad, we don't want to do that. If that player happens to be coming into the section with just no ammo and is just hanging there just completely helplessly while Ellie's getting attacked.
Fighting.
Yeah. It's just a better sequence, even though it breaks the fiction of the world a little bit.
Yeah.
All right.
So I had Lee did this part right here, and then once in a second, Bill's gonna come in
His favorite move with decapitation.
right there, and that's the part I did right there.
Nice.
Yeah.
the head just rolling down onto your body. That's so gnarly.
Bruce is very particular about how the head rolled off in that scene. So, yeah. I was like, can you do it? Hang it just a little bit. I was like, yeah, sure.
Nick told me a little bit about this sequence. He was saying that originally that this was kind of, the hope had been that the player would drive this. To be the player kind of going down all these dead ends and red herrings and kind of disorienting you. But that it actually ended up playing better with Bill sort of leading you and giving you some ideas, because it's very difficult to make the player run away. It just inherently, if they're looking at the threat, if they're looking at the enemy, they're not looking where they need to go. And conversely, if they're looking where they're trying to run away, they're not seeing the enemies chasing them. So it's very useful to have a buddy out in front of you, then you can see them and see where they're going, and it makes these kind of chase forced escape sequences play a lot better.
He's just not wearing a red shirt like Tommy was in the opening to let you know where to go.
I love all these little vignettes of them coming in.
Yeah.
It just keeps the pressure up.
So I really like this combination of it's a chase sequence, but there's combat in the middle of it, so it just keeps amping up the tension until you get to the end. And you're way braver than I would have been in this spot. I would have not stopped to shoot anybody.
I think that clicker might have been invincible because it took 3 revolver hits.
Oh, I don't know. I know like that section is tough, like trying to force, like deal with the edge case of players who don't go into the door. Like you
Thanks.
probably do have to do some things to force you to keep moving.
Clickers are a good way to do it with the one-hit kill.
Hey, what are you... Joel? Bill! What are you doing? Bill!
I think David Lamb animated this part. Usually at the cinematics, we split them up between 4 or 5 animators. So this particular one I didn't work on, but things like Eric Baldwin, Keith Patello, David Lamb, and I can't remember who else it was, but probably about 3 or 4 animators that split this up.
Cool. I like the tension at the beginning where he's checking Joel for bites.
Oh yeah.
And it's like, is he going to check Ellie for bites in the back of your head? And just her pulling the pipe free and starting to hit him is what gives you the cover. It's like, how would it have played out differently if he had checked her arm?
Absolutely. Well, it is that tension. It's like, how are we keeping Ellie's infection secret for all of this time? What I really like too is like, again, we were just talking about how protective Ellie was of Marlene, and it's like Joel and Ellie started to get to know each other. They've warmed up, and I know it's like she doesn't want to be handcuffed, but it also feels like she's being protective of the both of them. She doesn't know who this guy is. I'm comfortable. I know this guy's protecting me, or we've worked something out, so I'm gonna do it. But it's also like the next time we see Ellie being like so spirited, like really trying to be independent and stand up for herself.
Well, it don't matter because I don't have a card.
We should mention that Bill is being played by W.R. Brown from Deadwood, and Preacher too, something a little bit more recent, and also related to the comic books, things I like.
I only watched Deadwood last year,
Okay.
So I was like, oh wow, it's Bill.
I think the performances in this cutscene are amazing.
Oh yeah, it's so good. This came out before, like this was released kind of early.
Yeah, so we showed this cutscene during San Diego Comic-Con, and we were showing part of the process of how we go from mocap to what we get back from the the first pass in the animation to how we then put in the lighting. So we actually have a video that shows you all those different passes as part of it.
Yeah, I remember seeing this cutscene before I joined Naughty Dog because I came on for like the last year or so of Last of Us.
And all the facial animation was keyframes, so none of it was mocap. It's all, animated.
The pipe
cutscene.
Yeah, I love that.
All right, so let's talk about some of that. So obviously from then until even just Uncharted 4, like our facial animation has started to change and sort of with technology. So can you talk about like when you're looking at animation in what we're doing in Last of Us era, the challenges that we face or exactly how we did it?
Well, it was interesting coming from Uncharted 3, or even this Uncharted series in general, to this, because what Neil was looking for is basically for us to capture the actor, what was done on stage, and bring it into the scene. So in Uncharted, if certain things weren't necessarily like, we could tweak this facial expression a little bit, then we would do it. But this is pretty much for most of it was like one-to-one, as close as we could get to what was on stage.
How did you do that? Like what did it take to?
Looking at a lot of reference video from the stage, from all the actors, and just basically going frame by frame. It's okay, cool. Just putting that onto the characters in the game. So it was different. It was, especially for me coming straight onto it, it was kind of like, Uncharted is more active, more action-packed, it's bigger. This was more subdued, more nuanced, So it was first scene was a learning curve, trying to get. It's okay. This is the tone that we're trying to set. And then once we got there, kept rolling with it. So yeah.
How do you? So you're looking at video of the actors on stage. Mm-hmm. What does it take to go? Okay, like I need to translate this into a nuanced performance. What are you looking for? Like how often do you have to look at the video reference to go, okay, here's some subtleties I can pick up that maybe I didn't notice the first pass, or like how do you actually like approach that?
First pass is usually just kind of broad strokes, so we're just laying down one emotion. Like if generic one would be like Joel's sad or angry, so we would lay that emotion down, and then once we kind of got a basic look for Joel, then we would go back to the video footage and then look for the nuance that like Troy's put into it, and then we would take that and then put that onto Joel. So if there's any little eyebrow quiver or anything like that, we would take that and just animate it, put that, add that performance there. A lot of times Neil will request certain things that he saw in the video. There's like, make sure we get that and put that to the characters. Yeah. And now with mocap, it's like it's all there. So we're just kind of, making it look right for the CG version of the character. Right. So yeah.
You animated this, you said, right? The Bill chopping its head off?
No, I think he was referring to.
Oh,
one
the
previous one.
earlier one.
I think I did that one
You did
too.
that
Actually,
too?
there's so many like little animations. Like, oh yeah, I think I animated that. I can't
Lots of
remember.
Bill
Yeah.
chopping heads
I
off.
remember this scripting was a nightmare
Yeah.
because there's just so many ways you could interfere with it.
Oh yeah, I was
This,
just
this one too, by the way, because if you go into listen mode,
Fix one of these cars.
oh, so there's already infected like down the street. So if you start like firing here, which no one actually does, but if you do, like you can totally ruin this whole beat that's gonna happen here, or you can make it happen early at least. Like all sorts of contingencies we had to handle. This was also, by the way, originally the Bloater intro.
Oh really?
Oh wow.
So that back of that ambulance, they used to bust, the Bloater used to bust out of it, and then you would
Oh,
have the
that's so
first Bloater
funny.
fight right here.
I remember that.
I think for various reasons we figured out this space didn't work for the Bloater very well. A lot of, just too many obstacles, and it was too big. You could kind of run away from them too easily.
Oh,
Also
what? Just ignored my brick. Okay. The open combat with infected, I always have to remember, like, when I'm playing this game, you don't have dodge.
Yep.
Like, you need to respect them a different way.
This level was also a real challenge when we were making the infected melee, because there's all these cars, and like if you jump up on a car, these infected that are, you know, melee only all of a sudden have to deal with you being on a car, and if they jump on the car as well, like that's a really tiny platform, makes the animation really challenging, and like cars have these like sloped hoods that are just for everything melee wise it's just a nightmare. But we managed to find some good solutions of like if you're up on the car, one of the runners or whatever is going to get up in the car with you and fight you, and the other ones are going to go to the side of the car and just swipe at your ankles, and that way you're always getting some threat. And even if you're, you know, there's 4 runners mobbing you and you're on this tiny platform, it's still gonna work out.
It's funny that you have that anecdote, since I remember, like, for our demo that we did last year for the journalists, we had to solve the same problem again. And it was just, you know, whatever we had before over the years between, it just, you know, stopped working or was rebuilt, and we had to solve the exact same problem. How do we deal with you getting up on cars? All these little edge cases that you wouldn't necessarily think about.
I mean, I think that's
In the cellar.
somewhat generally true in game development. Generally, is like you go from, you know, maybe one gen to another, and you get this amazing new technology, but it doesn't have all the like weird quirks and hacks and whatever that the last gen tech had, and you have to refigure out like, oh yeah, how did we solve this problem in the past?
Yeah.
Here we are.
And sometimes, you know, you just run into things where you realize we could do the same thing, but except we made this other change somewhere else, and it causes new problems. Like, it's so interesting how
I need a gun.
No, you
to get all the detail that we try and get, and make sure everything works and makes sense
No.
to the degree that we want it to.
Plus, every time you kind of advance forward in technology, things that might have been like acceptable,
Just wait
you know,
around
a
for
generation
it to
ago, all of a
kill.
sudden it's like, oh well, we can't handle that edge case this way. That looks too bad.
Yeah.
Let's do it for real. Let's find a real solution to it. And now all of a sudden, dealing with a lot more complexity, but the end result kind of speaks for itself usually.
Are you ever trying to anticipate some of those edge cases, or is
Oh.
it something where it's like you load the part that you're working on up and you go, oh, okay, I just tried to do this and it's not working, or you look at you're building the space and going, okay, like I need to consider this ahead of time.
It's usually a bit of both, you know. What's the Donald Rumsfeld quote about like known
Right, yeah.
unknowns and unknown unknowns? It's like you can set up a sequence. You can be like, I can kind of see if you cheese this or cheese that or did this unexpected thing, you would break. So you account for those, and then QA comes and tries something even wilder or something more
Or a
unusual.
focus tester.
Yeah.
Which is
You're like,
super
I
helpful.
hadn't accounted for that that one.
Yeah, like you try and think of as much of it as you can, and you usually, often I'll come up with some crazy stuff, and it's like, you know, you can break things in spectacular ways,
Stupid pirate.
but then no matter how much you think you've handled those things, you do a focus test, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, I wasn't expecting someone to get that scared right there and run that specific direction and hide in that specific corner, and everything breaks if they do that or something weird like that.
Yeah, scripting for games would be a lot easier if we didn't have to account for the edge cases. If we were less Naughty Dog games are kind of all about keeping you on the stick, keeping you in control. You know, really trying to only, you know, go into the cinematics are the cinematics, but then otherwise everything is we should try to keep it on the stick. But keep it on the stick is just a commitment to handling all of these edge cases, and it's just I don't know what ratio it would be, but it would almost have to be like 70% getting the golden path to work, 30% getting all those edge cases to work. And so we really do try to, we are committing to these sequences, and once we decide to do them, we're going to do handle every edge case.
Once that commitment starts, like, we got to do it. It's got to happen. Yeah, it's crazy.
So now you've seen the trap bombs that Bill's been using all through the level, and now you get to use them yourself, because now you get the recipe. And this church actually used to have a fairly, like, that beat of like learning the craft bomb recipe from Bill used to be like a whole sequence. Like you'd be like, oh, I got some explosives in this room, I got some canisters in this room, go find them and bring them back to me. And you bring them back to him, and like he'd do this big animation showing you like how to make the trap bomb, but it ended up being just like, people want to get moving here. Like it's not like the crafting is like such a cool, intense thing that you really want to see Bill do it himself. So kind of streamlined it into that section.
I'm wondering,
and instead you get a lot more time just like exploring this cool basement and finding all of Bill's cool stuff. Like,
can we catch her taking the comics?
Yeah. But what I really like is in that cutscene just how much setup there is for stuff. Like, I need a gun, you're not getting one, so we're setting up the part where Joel comes around on that and does understand she's capable. How Bill is being like, don't touch anything. She's like, I'm not touching anything. Right. Clearly, maybe taking stuff just because she's angry at Bill because he gave him the finger. Like all of this setup for these like little moments later on. I mean, not little. I don't want to say like giving Ellie the rifle's a little moment, but other moments. But I feel like these moments that we're setting up here is just really great. That don't pay off for a while.
Yeah.
I mean, it's jumping ahead a bit, but it reminds me a bit of like the toy store, where there's the robot, and then Ellie, steals that and then gives it to Sam later. Just cool through line of Ellie kind of stealing things.
I mean, what else are you gonna do when civilization has collapsed, laws don't exist,
Yeah.
So this was the section I can speak now a little more authoritatively, because like from here through this graveyard I did a lot of the both infected scripting and just scripting in general, and this section was a nightmare in terms of development. The first reason being that it's this really, really tight graveyard, and you have two buddies with you who are both have to be able to stay in stealth. So like, I remember, later in development than it probably should have been, we were playing this section and just watching Bill and Ellie and just going like, oh man, they're really struggling with the stealth in this area. Like, even this, which is, could be better, is a lot better than what it was during development. We were just like, oh gosh, how do we handle this complexity of player, two buddies, two clickers, player can lure the clickers anywhere with bricks. So this really was kind of the proving ground for our buddy stealth in whatever form it ended up in when we shipped. But
well, some of these spaces are really narrow, I guess, from the look of it. So what was the design choice behind making this more claustrophobic space, I guess?
Well, this whole kind of back streets is somewhat. It's both a corridor, but it's kind of like I'd almost say wide linear if we hadn't used that word. Something a little different in Uncharted 4, but it's a kind of a linear path that doesn't initially read as a linear path, kind of going from here all the way through the suburbs, kind of getting towards the high school. But there's lots of little side areas you can go to. So as much as you're being led by Bill and there's a destination, there's a goal, and it is, there's not a ton of freedom to it's not like it's just a pure wide space. There are a lot of just within the area that you have, there's a lot of cool things to find, and the claustrophobicness, I think, helps just keep the pressure up. If it was just big and wide as the street was initially, then it stops feeling like, oh, there could be an infected around any corner. So it's feeling, oh, this is more leisurely. This is kind of a exploration story space. Whereas here, because it's tighter, because it's more constrained, now you're really feeling more of the pressure. If you get spotted by an infected, you're going to have less room to just back up and run and kite the enemies away.
Okay.
It puts pressure on you to want to deal with them at all in the first place, because if you had enough room with clickers, since they're blind, you can just freely walk around without worry. So we really do have to bring the player close to clickers, or put them in a space with runners to get that full risk.
The other, I mean, just tech limitation-wise, is that on the PS3 we had a limit of 8 AI, and you have 2 buddies with you, so that's 2 already. So we can only have 6 more NPCs at a time. That was kind of like the reality we were living with in that console generation, and so we really had to be creative in these sections, from memory, from scripting. We are desperately despawning things behind you and spawning things ahead of you just to manage, so there's a manageable amount of things on screen at any one time, manageable number of enemies that are alive at any one time. And I think I was talking to Mark Davies, who was the level designer on this, and he was saying this level he had to make a special look for the clickers.
Oh wow.
There's slightly less variety in the clicker looks in this level, just so that we could get within memory.
Wow.
Oh yeah.
I'm seeing some great familiar names in here too, like Tilu Strategist in the chat. So it's nice to see some familiar names I see from around the internet and from previous chats too. Just random shout out. Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's all good.
Yeah, glad to have people coming in.
So one of the things I actually saw in chat that wasn't necessarily a question, but brings to mind is Anthony had mentioned that in Grounded we would have been spotted earlier. So you can talk about some of the things that you do in terms of changing, when you change difficulty and difficulty tuning, what are some of the changes that you do in this space?
So I think in this space, because of the memory limitations, we couldn't, sometimes in levels when we're on harder difficulties, we'll swap out easier enemies for harder enemies, or we'll just have more enemies. For this space, I think we didn't mess too much with the encounter composition, but yeah, it's the systemic things. It's enemy perception, both in terms of hearing and sight. Will make their have, the way we model their perception is they have these vision cones, and we can make those vision cones longer or wider, or we can say at this point in the cone it takes 1 second to acquire you, but further in the cone it takes 2 seconds. We can lower those times on harder difficulties. We also have a fair amount of play with just we have some grace built in when you surprise an enemy, where you say, oh, well, you surprised them and they're aware of you, but for a second or so you'll be able to grab them. Okay. We can lower that time on harder difficulties, or we can extend it a bit on easier difficulties. And obviously for Grounded, there's the ammo and supplies that we can play with. There's the amount of damage that the enemies do, so enemies, when they hit you, they can hit a lot harder. Sometimes we can play with combo lengths for melee. They can have a faster combo or a longer combo.
Oh, here's the next spell.
There we go.
You know about that.
Yeah, the thing that's interesting with clickers is how intricate their knowledge model, their perception model is, I guess. Especially in this game, their hearing is so precise that you need to be partial sticking in order to not be heard. Unless you're behind them, where there's more forgiveness. I imagine just because people struggled to understand partial sticking.
I think it's a little bit that, and it's also something we always have to be very cautious about when we're developing these systems is if the player is doing the right thing and gets a negative reaction, they're going to feel oh, I was doing the wrong thing. So if you were half-sticking behind a clicker trying to go for that kill, and I don't know, maybe your thumb slipped slightly and you just got a little bit of that false stick, or you were just a little bit off and you got busted, that's a lesson you would learn, right? You would play the rest of the game saying oh, I guess half-sticking against clickers doesn't work. So and I'm sure you know, or you've experienced this yourself developing this, but we really need to be cautious. If the player's doing the right thing, we always call it player favoring. Just if the player's doing the right thing, just give it to them. They were maybe slightly off, they were a little bit sloppy, but we're teaching the right lessons and they're developing the right strategies, and they can feel more confident when they face clickers in the future. Oh yeah, I remember 2 levels ago I half-sticked and I snuck up in a clicker and I killed them and it worked. Therefore, this is a good strategy I should use against clickers.
I love this house. It's just full of them.
I like all the rooms. Every time I go into them, I'm like, oh, what was this person like that used to live here?
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy.
I also think just having the sleeping infected was a great tool we had in terms of making encounters feel different, because this level is really low key, and you've got this place you can explore and kind of just enjoy the level design, but you have this constant like threat.
Yeah.
Just knowing like, I really need to move slowly, I really need to be careful. And we would often design encounters with like a certain number of infected that are there to make the space feel like a good stealth encounter.
Yeah.
And then we would have additional infected that were asleep. And so it'd be like, okay, we really want you to go quietly here, because if you go loud, there's even more threat than what is initially available.
Although I got some idea who might have come through here.
Yeah, we were discussing a little bit before the difference between stealthing and encounter where there are more runners who are awake versus when there are more clickers who are awake. And you can create a different experience and strategy that players need to use in those encounters, depending on which are awake, but we can still make it so that if things go loud, you still have that good mix just by choosing, are we going to put some of the clickers sleeping in the corners or maybe more of the runners?
Yeah,
I'm loving all the chat, by the way, talking about how you just walk by those 2 clickers like right in front of them with your half stick. Like everyone's like, look at those stealth skills, which actually reminds me, like I don't know, like is this how you usually play all of this? Like how do you usually play?
Yeah, I'm playing it pretty naturally. I'm probably going loud at a few times where I would have just finished out in stealth, just because I know some people probably like more variety in the stream, and
To some extent, like when you're a combat designer and you're making these sequences, you don't get the luxury of like only playing it the way you like to play it. So when we're playing this level, we have to play it like the player who's going to ghost it, like the player who's going to stealth kill it, like the player, like our game director Anthony Newman plays aggro. He is a very much go loud player, and we can also ask people around the studio like, hey, you play this encounter, and then their play style will influence how they play it, but also what's if they're coming into a setup fresh, they'll be able to say like, oh, what cues is this environment giving me? What tactics does this layout or this enemy composition suggest?
I want to talk about this combat space in a second.
Combat to break out here so that you didn't just we didn't want it to be too low key, because we're setting up now all this pressure that you're going to have to retreat into the school because the number of runners is just getting too large.
I keep on getting hit because I'm expecting to be able to dodge.
Yeah.
I'm so used to that mechanic now.
Well, we're running into that in our past playthroughs as well. So, like you're also just running into combat and just like mashing the button, thinking you can like dodge, and it's like, oh, mashing melee isn't going to work here.
Yep.
So I know we've already sort of skipped ahead and we're going to head in, but I always found, well, when I was playing through it, I found this spot really fascinating because you have this really big open area, but we have all these buses and we sort of made it tight, but then there's an incredible amount of runners in here that you're encountering, and there's different ways to approach it up until that fourth one, right? You can stealth through a lot of it. So I guess just broadly is like, what were you trying to communicate to the player when you're getting here? What do you want the player to take away from in this space?
It probably was, I mean, not probably was. The idea was that we've set up the stakes. You are in this house, the school is there, and you can see in the cutscene there's tons of these runners. And just naturally, to some extent, because they're unaware of you, you have an opportunity to stealth kill some of them. And if we hadn't gone in and scripted it, you probably could have just stealth killed all the way to this exit. But we really needed to have this moment of like, oh fuck, there really are. I'm sorry, there really are a lot of runners.
You're not saying anything that isn't already said in the game.
I have a toddler. I'm used to not trying to swear too much. but yeah, cause like now we're setting up this beat. Imagine if you had stealth through this entire encounter and gotten over the bus, and now there's just this horde of runners just comes out of nowhere. It would feel kind of unmotivated. So we really wanted to say like, okay, no matter how the player plays coming up to this moment, there's going to be a moment where stealth gets broken and they have to go loud, and it's going to reinforce the story beat that's going to happen here, that like they're being overrun. They've gone to this dangerous part of town where there's lots of infected, where Bill doesn't normally like to go, and something has gone wrong, and now they're having to kind of modify the plan a little bit on the fly and get into this window.
Something I've noticed when playing this is all of the infected that are mobbing you are runners, and then you get grabbed suddenly out of nowhere by a clicker.
So there's a development reason for that, is that this cutscene was captured way in advance of this level being finished. And I think at the time that this cutscene was captured, it may have been that the runners didn't even exist yet as an enemy type. This was really, really early, and they only had the clickers as kind of the idea that this is going to be one of the enemies. This is before I joined. And so when they came to this section and they're like, oh, it's a bunch of runners. How do we get this clicker justified into this cutscene? And they were even asking, like, can we change the cutscene? Can we modify it so it's another runner? It's like, no, that's in the can. That's done. It actually relates to here. This was originally a chase beat. So like when you just had, the infected were busting through the door, you were going to be chased through this school.
Right.
But it didn't fit just didn't fit the beat they were going for. They didn't want to get to that level of intensity. And it was like, oh, well, now we're somewhat having to retrofit and say like, well, no, actually, when you get through those doors, it gets quiet again to support this stealth beat here. But yeah, to some extent, that's just something you always have to deal with in game development is that things come in at different times. So when these cinematics were done earlier than some of the gameplay, you have to manage that and you have to work around it. And yeah, so we had to have, right as you're getting in that window, the lone clicker in the level jumps you from behind.
Oh, this sneaky
this
reinforcement runner.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna take him out before, in case things go bad, so I don't get ambushed from behind here.
Yeah, one of the things I just saw, I didn't catch we did it before, but I really like a lot of the smaller details we did to really make the characters feel grounded in the world, is like when Bill's next to you and like Joel puts his hand above him when they're up against stealth, rather than just like, oh, more gamey, like push him out of the way or something.
And that clicker comes out behind you.
Yeah,
to add pressure.
This was all, there was a fair bit of scripting in this level to kind of always make sure that no matter how you were playing it or what you were doing, that we kind of, it's not like we just put these guys on patrol routes and say, oh, they just, do their thing, whatever. It's like, oh, if you go left, we'll send someone a little bit subtly left. If you go right, we'll send someone right. If you stealth kill everyone out there, maybe someone wanders out of the classroom. So we're always trying to think of like, how do we keep the pressure up? How do we keep the, those guys enter the room when you enter the room, kind of creates this fun challenge.
Come on, catch fire, guys.
They're not being
there we
very
go.
cooperative. Do you use some of that as a method to guide the player, to tell the player to go elsewhere or in a particular direction, or is it more just for pressure in this case?
In this case, it's more to keep it interesting for pressure. And actually, the kind of counterintuitive thing is that you'd think that you could pressure the player away from enemies, areas by putting enemies there, where I found it almost always to be the opposite. If you put enemies somewhere, you're drawing the player towards there. It's very actually hard to draw the players away from places, and the way I think we end up doing that is like through shape language, color language, lighting. Like if there's a part of the layout that everyone seems to be drawn to, but there's nothing interesting there, we have a choice. We could put something interesting there, but that's not always an option. Or then we have to think, how can we make it darker? How can we make it drabber? How can we, if there's some very detailed, something very detailed that's drawing your attention, how can we say, oh, take that out, make that, put that thing that's drawing everyone's eye and put it where we want you to go.
Here we go.
Help me open this.
All right, ready?
A big fight. Yeah.
We're on the way.
So we were talking about a little bit about this before we headed into the stream, but so
This ain't gonna hold it for long.
put yourself, you're designing
Don't sound good.
basically what's going to be the bloater fight. What are the considerations you put in mind, knowing, okay, we have a particular enemy with particular fight style, particular damage tolerance.
I got this.
He's going to have clickers that runners that will come in to support. How do you build the environment? Like, what are the considerations of like, okay, what do I want to give the player challenging or for benefit in it?
Well, I mean, to some extent, that process was a little backwards for this fight, because we made the bloater, the way he acts in itself was kind of somewhat the design of this encounter. I came on this project kind of before the bloater was added, and I actually worked with Bruce Straley to develop the prototype for the bloater and kind of how he was acting. And wow, You smoked him.
Yeah, so that's just down to knowing how the armor works. Just make sure
I know
to
we
hit
didn't even get a chance to like talk about how does the armor work. Let's talk about throwing projectiles, like all these things that we wanted to talk about. Because you usually like finish this so quickly.
Oh, my bad. I don't know if I don't even think I.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
can I restart the encounter? I could do it if you.
Yeah.
Very
Well,
good.
yeah. Let's do it. We've got a second. Let's talk a little bit about.
It may have checkpointed you after he died.
Oh,
My
It's all
bad.
good. But yeah, so we were developing the bloater as an enemy, and we really wanted something that complemented the existing infected. And the existing infected at the time were the runner and the clicker, and they ran at you. They ran at you. So we didn't want to make another boss that just ran at you, because then that wouldn't complement each other well. So we landed this idea of area denial, that he would be throwing these projectiles and putting down these fields that now are persistent and creating damage, and that actually plays very interestingly with the other infected, because all of a sudden you want to run away from a clicker, and there's on your left is a cloud. Well, now you have to go right, or now you have to go a different direction. All of a sudden you're pinned in some corner. So that was the first goal of developing the bloater, was I find something that complements the other infected very well. And then maybe Andrew, you can speak a little bit to, he was a big armored enemy, and we developed a unique armor system for the bloater.
Yeah, so obviously, as I've said, I wasn't a part of the team here, but I've often working on part 2 had to load back into this game to see how did things work with some of these enemy types. I've done that a lot with clickers for their stealth mechanics. I've done that a lot for the bloater. And the bloater's armor is actually pretty interesting. What a lot of people assume are weak points of those spores actually just serve as a way to break off a piece of his armor, and you cannot damage him until some of the armor has been removed. So the way I was able to kill it as quickly as I did is just knowing that if I shot one of those spores, it would create a big unarmored section, and as long as I kept shooting him there, he would be taking damage and dying.
It's fun. It's funny going back and looking at that, because like that's so much more complicated than we often lean towards. Like we
Right.
often, because the game itself is already fairly complicated and there's already these moving parts, like we try to rely on fairly simple solutions for a lot of the stuff. And like hearing like, oh wow, that system is really quite complicated. Having this idea of you want to shoot the cordyceps to break off the armor, to expose the flesh, to then shoot the flesh to cause the actual damage.
Yeah.
Like, just really, really, but yeah, creates kind of a cool gameplay loop. Not one that probably players really got a chance to really grok.
What's
but-
funny is I saw from Anthony in the chat here that his feet just have no armor.
Oh,
So you can skip having to break the armor at all, apparently, by just targeting his feet,
that's a
which is
great tip.
amazing. That must be the trick with the one-hit kill.
Yeah.
And it was, as much as I prototyped the bloater behaviors and the AI and the role and stuff, it was Benson Russell's the designer who worked on the armor, him and Mark Botta, the programmer,
What, you know this guy or
the
something?
ones who developed the armor system on T1.
Frank,
shout out to Keith on this scene right here.
Who the hell's
It's
Frank?
really well done.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he was my partner.
I love his performance here.
yeah.
Just the slight shudder in his voice as he
He's the
says
only
that,
idiot that
and
would wear a shirt like that.
you just feel it.
Well, just the lines too, right? Like how he
He's
talks
got
about
bites.
Frank right here.
Here,
Trails
Hey.
off.
Reckon he didn't want to turn, so he...
yeah, guess not.
I like how it comes out of like a lot of action, and you get really
fuck it.
grounded, and then it's just like, oh yeah, this is serious. Like, you know.
Yeah.
I love too how it's like
Yeah.
Bill being Bill, he's still giving these like very matter-of-fact, pragmatic kind of. The things he's saying are so straightforward, but then it's the performance on top of that. It's the sadness, it's the face, it's
Yeah.
Get out.
So yeah, it's beautiful.
Get out.
And so much of that is on your guys' side, having to key all of those facial animations.
Yeah.
Obviously, you're looking at the actor's performance, but you guys bring that to life in the game.
I mean, that might be interesting for the viewers, just talking about like, what does it mean to key a facial animation? That means literally like
Yeah.
moving face joints,
We
right?
have to move face joints. It's kind of hard to explain, but it's like a digital puppet, and each little controller moves a little eyebrow, a little corner of the mouth, that
and
sort of thing.
And you have
Yeah.
just like a ton of these little controls, right?
Yeah,
You have
the-
like
Well, on this one, I think it wasn't as much as we have now, but it was a lot still, and it's basically a slider that moves the corner of a mouth up,
Yeah.
the slider that opens the jaw, slider that moves this part of the eyebrow, and select the eyes so you can move the eyes around. So when we get it, there's nothing there. It's completely blank.
And I mean, even before you're doing that, there's a whole pipeline of like, there's a character modeler making the character and like
Yes.
making the geometry and the textures and just all making the character. Then between you and the character, there's the rigger, and they're setting up the like which kind of triangles on the character are attached to which bones in the animation rig.
Right.
And then when you're moving the sliders, it's like moving that bone in the rig, which is in turn moving the triangles of the mesh. Like,
Right.
it's amazing how much work goes into the like just step by step to make this performance in the
It
end.
takes a lot of people. And another aspect you have to think about too is that like Troy doesn't look like Joel, so we have to figure out what is Joel's look and how can we get Troy to go into Joel, and it takes a lot of back and forth, and finally when you get it, all this comes through and everything reads like it. Yeah, it's definitely a process, and sometimes like it happens later. You don't get it the first time. Sometimes it's like you'll do a couple scenes, you're like, oh, that is Troy / Joel's smile. So we have to go back and like incorporate that into into the earlier work we've done. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was one of the things I wanted to ask earlier is, like, are there things over time that you pick up and you go, oh, this is really characteristic to this actor, but it's something we actually definitely want to include because like that then becomes a through line of the character. Yeah. Do you remember any of the ones that for Joel?
He has this kind of look of like seriousness, like don't mess with me type of look, and I guess with different animators, some things that people capture right away. So like, I may be working on a scene, and Arne, you might have a scene, and then you do something in your scene, and I'm like, oh, that's good. I want to take that and put it back into my scene, So it's kind of like of a communal back and forth type thing where we're kind of looking at everybody's work and kind of saying, can we use that or use this?
Was there anything for any of the other characters maybe that sticks out to you that incorporated?
It was for Ellie, it was her smile that it was tough to nail down, but when you go to the footage and you see it, then you try and pull that in and use it. And then somebody will have the perfect quintessential Ellie smile in her scene, and then that gets propagated through all the animators to use, So it's things like that.
It's funny, I feel like there's parallels on like the design team where you talk about like, one person puts one thing on a level, like a mechanic or a shape or just anything.
Yeah.
All the other designers can be like, that's awesome, I want to do that on my level.
Yeah.
And someone else who's like maybe later in development is still like block meshing a level, they're like, I'm going to make a whole level, make it like based around that mechanic now. Or it really is, it's one of the fun things I think about making games, and especially making games at Naughty Dog, just full of talented people everywhere, is there's just so much to draw inspiration from, and so many, just cool people all around all the time to kind of just bounce ideas off of, or and even between departments, one department will do something cool, now they need some programming support, and now like programming gets some cool ideas from that. Making games is fun. It's a really fun process, and really, when it's everything's firing all cylinders and everyone's collaborating, great feeling. Oh. I think we also, I think this has come up in various other media as well, but like this idea at Naughty Dog that was enforced to me when I started here was that like, everyone is a designer.
Yeah.
So like anyone can come up to anyone and give them feedback or ideas or suggest something. There's no, ego or sense of like, oh well, you're a lighting artist. What your opinion on combat design doesn't matter. It's like, no, it's really kind of a fun and healthy process, and everyone's feedback across all departments is really taken into account.
Yeah, totally collaborative. I remember talking to Bruce about the flashlight, the size of it, and we went back and forth on it. And I was like, it's too big. We want smaller. He's not thinking it's fine. And then I played the game or a particular level where we were tweaking it in, and I was like, yeah, it's good. It's good. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, it's always like this kind of back and forth between things.
Sometimes a different perspective. Someone can jump in, never saw something before, but they have some other thing that they know that you've never experienced, and they'll just give you the one piece of feedback that's so key,
Yeah.
and then you just suddenly opens up a new level of understanding that you wouldn't have had, and it can come from anywhere.
Bill, about your buddy back there, that's a tough
I
deal.
guess we kind of talked through that truck sequence. It's
all
a
right.
good one, though. I like that sequence a lot. Fighting with Bill. That was a lot of challenging kind of AI stuff there, where we had to trade off Bill pushing the truck with you versus fighting, and making sure that like the enemies are targeting you, like, you know, kind of creating appropriate moments of pressure and then moments of low pressure where you can actually push the truck. That was also really fun.
I guess what was a particular intent that we may have had with, instead of, okay, it's just pushing the truck down and it's a chase sequence, right? Which I think is very typical in movies. But why switch that up, or what were we trying to do there, do you know?
I don't know if I can speak to like a specific like high-level design goal, other than that was a fun challenge of like having to, there's these two things you have to do, and you're wanting to just push the truck and get out of there, but you're constantly having to deal with these floods of infected. I think as well, that's also a sequence that when you're just in normal gameplay is often, is difficult to get away with in normal gameplay, because you're like, oh, well, what if I just run away? What if I just sit in the corner with my shotgun? It's like we have more limited tools as to like what we can do to keep the pressure up. But in this sequence, is like, if you run away down the street, Ellie's going to die in the truck. So now it's a very justified forced combat encounter, and just having this thing you need to protect and this thing you need to push and this constant wave of enemies. Just that whole dynamic works really well with our core mechanics. So I think we just wanted to develop the gameplay beat from that.
Okay.
I think I like about that too is that it kind of just, I like the design of the way it switches what you're doing. So it's kind of, you've done stealth, you've done, run and gun where you're just blasting people infected away. And now in this level, we have a section of it where you're fighting them upside down.
Yeah.
And now you have a section where, it's like protect the prize type section. And I mean, it's just a real cool way to flip it around and play the voice.
That's a really good way to put it, because it's like, that's the other thing that we're looking at when we're looking at the game from like a really, really high level, is like, we don't want to just have the same beat over and over and over.
Right.
So like when you play Billstown, it's like, it starts with an explorer, and it's got this really intense chase when you first meet, or it's got the upside down sequence, special sequence where you're playing differently, and then the chase.
Yeah.
Then you get another little downbeat with Bill, and now you're getting this forced fight in the street with outside the church. Again, another kind of downbeat in the church. So, this is the kind of consideration that is maybe more on the level of like Neil and Bruce, but when they're planning out the level, the whole game, and they're saying like, okay, how do we make this level fun? How do we make it so that you're never dragging, or you're never feeling like, oh, I've been playing the same way for 15 minutes, I'm bored now. These kind of special sequences really spice up the gameplay and play in really nicely with all our existing kind of beats of stealth beat, story beat, explore beat, scripted beat, or just special beat where we're flipping the rules around. Like, that stuff is really important to like the long-term pacing of a fairly long game like The Last of Us.
And it really does change how you approach. Like on our side, we can throw the same 3 enemy types at you, or same 2 enemy types at you. But if your goal is orthogonally like different in this unique way, where in any other encounter where you're just supposed to kill them or get by them, if one is chasing at you, you're going to immediately think, I got to shoot that. In this beat, just by adding this, okay, there's like a progress bar that you have to stop shooting and push. All of a sudden it changes the way you're thinking, is like, well, how much longer can I push the truck before I really have to go, before that clicker gets here?
It's kind of got that good like horror movie vibe too, of like, I have to look away from the monster and to push this truck, and how close behind me are they,
Yeah, it just changes it just enough that it feels like
a
different experience with the same types of enemies.
And I'll add too, on top of that, to have Ellie in the front like driving, I think it just pulls you into it anymore, because you're like, Ellie, come on, start the car, and it's pushing it, and it just really helps pull you into the game. Like, you just kind of, you feel like you're there, going through it. So yeah,
I'm gonna have to have a conversation later because there was a comment in chat that I had earlier, which is like, how does Ellie know how to pop a clutch? Like, we know a little bit of her
Yeah.
background. Like, what was she out sneaking that they decided that she learned how to drive?
I feel like there's a lot of Ellie's backstory that's still very mysterious.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, through the game, yeah.
Yeah.
And when you play T1, you're like, all these characters have these just great mystery to them and a lot that's unsaid, and that really makes it interesting as they get revealed through the story and you're learning things. It's like you're putting a puzzle together.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I like that we're not like explaining all of that like
Yeah.
straight off. I think that draws me at least into the
I mean,
characters
even
quite
when
a
you were
bit.
saying earlier in Military City, it was like, you meet Marlene and she has some connection to Ellie, but you're not sure how. And then there's this guy Tommy, and he's also related in the mix. Like the fact that we set that up so much earlier than when it's actually revealed is like the whole time you're playing, like the gears are going in your brain. You just go like, how does this all fit together? How does this work? And
It's also surprising when those things happen too, because at the beginning you have no clue that you're actually going to meet these people that they're talking about. It's like it seems like it's just they're just talking about somebody, but then later in the game, you actually meet these people and you interact with them. And
yeah, because I bet if you're playing the game for the first time, you
Yeah.
might hear, "Oh, I know his brother Tommy."
Oh,
It's
okay,
like,
cool,
okay,
alright,
cool,
whatever,
Tommy.
yeah, exactly,
It's all
yeah,
good. And then
yeah.
later on, whoa, Tommy!
Exactly, you're here. Yeah, heard so much about you.
And then
It's
you
like-
play the game the second time, you're like, "Oh, they set that up way earlier."
Exactly. Yeah, it's really cool. It's really cool.
Awesome. Well, that ends our stream for today. So thanks everyone for joining. Please be sure to join us next week where we're switching up things a little bit, and we're going to be playing San Diego Studios' newest, The Show 20. That's next week on Wednesday, March 18th. So please come join us for that. If you're still interested in doing Last of Us Replay, we'll be back in about 3 weeks on April 1st, where we're headed into one of my favorite sections of the game, which is Pittsburgh, which I've really enjoyed playing and was part of our E3 demo as well. Thanks everyone for joining us on the stream and in chat, for submitting questions. Hope we got through a few of them organically rather than flat out. And a big thanks to Kion, Andrew, and Matthew for joining us on today, and really love the conversation. It was like really great to hear some of this stuff. As always, wanted to thank our behind-the-scenes crew, Scott, Dina, Chris, Jacqueline, Sam back there on the control board, Ashley in chat, and everyone else involved in putting this together. Please be sure to follow us on all of our social media platforms, on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. And also be sure, again, if you're interested in following these streams, to come watch us on Twitch and YouTube. Make sure that you follow us and subscribe and turn on those notifications for when we go live. We will see you next week.
Underneath the bridge, the top has sprung a leak, and I'm living off of grass, and the drippings from the ceiling. It's okay to eat fish, 'cause they don't have any feelings. Something in the way. Something in the way, yeah.
PlayStation